Hello, everybody. Welcome to World War II. This is Dr. Z for AP Euro, and we're going to probably have about 4 sets of World War II videos. And the Holocaust, I'm not going to make Holocaust slides because we're going to go over those live in class, okay? I think that topic deserves live teaching rather than a YouTube video. So here we go with your general information on World War II. The College Board, from your key concept outline, they want you to understand causes in the interwar era: fascism, hypernationalism, racist ideologies, failure of appeasement of Hitler, and his desire to gain more territory. That those are causes of World War II. Also, fascist efforts to revise the Treaty of Versailles that made them very upset leads to the war, and that the war is a conflict between liberal democracies temporarily allied with communist Russia, okay, and fascist states. So it's democratic / communism versus fascism are the two sides for World War II. World War II ends in the defeat of Italian and German fascism. Europe is absolutely ruined, and liberal capitalist democracies then face centrally directed communist states, which are the only viable alternatives left. So with the third leg of fascism booted out of the picture, communism and liberal democracies are the only alternatives left, and thus the Cold War. So World War I leads to World War II. World War II leads to the Cold War. So some other main concepts that they want you to understand is that it was more violent than World War I. Combatants in World War II engaged in wholesale destruction of cities. You'll see some images in these next videos that I'm going to make for you. Deliberate attacks on civilians, systematic destruction of their enemies' industrial complexes. These are things that we call total war, right? When you have, that blurred line between combatants and non-combatants. Nazis also undertook the annihilation of the Jews from the whole continent in the Holocaust that we will study in class, and murdered a number of other targeted groups. And as I said, we will be learning about the Holocaust in class. So what is total war? From your key concept outline, some of the ideas that they want to share with you are that total war and political instability in the first half of the 20th century gave way to a polarized state order during the Cold War and eventually to efforts at a transnational union, i.e. the United Nations. So that's kind of the big picture, right? Is that total war, as we introduced it during World War I, right, leads into World War II because of the Treaty of Versailles, right? And then this real all-encompassing blurry war where the lines are blurred between combatants and civilians eventually leads to the Cold War itself. Okay, that's what your key concept outline wants to stress to you. Also, the stresses of economic collapse and total war engendered internal conflicts within European states, creating conflicting conceptions of the relationship between the individual and the state. This is a theme. This is one of the main themes of the 5 themes of AP Euro. How does the relationship between the individual and the state change? As demonstrated in the ideological battle between liberal democracy, communism, and fascism. Okay, so that's another concept that they want you to kind of think about big picture. So let's get sort of into some of the nitty gritty then. Initially, World War II was 2 separate conflicts. One conflict was in Asia in 1937, the Second Sino-Japanese War between China and Japan. Right, and the other conflict was Europe in 1939 with the German invasion of Poland. Right. So when did World War I begin? Right. There's different ways to answer that question, as there are with many things in history. As for the sides of the war, we have Axis and Allies, hence you have the board game, right? So the Allies are Great Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States, whereas the Axis powers are Germany, Italy, and Japan. And Italy, once again, like they did in World War I, will switch sides because the Allied invasion will liberate Italy at the end of the war from Nazis, Nazi rule. All right. So World War II's version of total war is sort of like World War I's version, but much more than that. So 100 million military personnel are mobilized across the entire world. That's kind of a just mind-boggling amount of people to think about as, military personnel alone. There really was no distinction between civil and military resources. I mean, everybody was engaged in the war in some way, shape, or form. Whole cities were destroyed. There's a photograph here of Dresden, Germany. And when we look at the destruction of the cities, I mean, it's just leveled buildings, just unrecognizable urban environments. There's also 60 million casualties in World War II. We talked about this very quickly when we were at the end of the 19th century, but the major global famines at the end of the 19th century as a result of European colonization and new imperialism had about 30 million casualties. So 60 million. I mean, this is just, a huge number. It's very hard to wrap your head around how many people that is. The majority of the casualties as well were civilian, right? Which is another reason why we call this a total war. And it is the deadliest conflict in human history. 4 trillion US dollars were the final cost of the war. And those are 1944 dollars. In 2024 dollars, I'm not sure how much that would be. So as we move towards the war, Netflix has a really amazing documentary series called World War II in Color. And the very first episode gives an excellent understanding of the European lead up to the war, right? What were the steps taken that got us to the war? So we've got fascist movements, both in Italy and Germany, right? The Germans are upset about the Treaty of Versailles. We've talked about this a lot. In 1936, Hitler remilitarizes the Rhineland. He's like, this whole, reduction in arms, we're not going to do that. We're going to remilitarize. Also, the Spanish Civil War breaks out. So, Spain is facing its own fascist tide that'll last about 70 years. And Germany and Italy form the Rome-Berlin axis, right? So the sides are set. Hitler is not abiding by Treaty of Versailles policies, right? And then the chronology of what happens. So, like I said, that Netflix documentary, please watch it. It's wonderful. It walks you through all of this in about 60 minutes. It's well worth your time. So, Germany annexes Austria in 1938, and then claims. So, wow, this is the vision, the big Germany vision, right? And so we could see, okay, we're not a nation. Now we're thinking empire, right? Then they claimed the Sudetenland. And France and Britain look at this and they're like, okay, we're gonna, we're not gonna do anything, but we don't want you to take any more territory, right? And so Hitler's like, fine, I won't take any more territory. And this is called appeasement, okay? The Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, said, peace in our time. Like, we're just gonna appease Hitler, and hopefully nothing will happen, okay? And Czechoslovakia and the USSR are excluded from the Munich conference, so therefore the Sudetenland could go to Germany. And this seemed like a good idea at the time, although everybody kind of looks poorly on Neville Chamberlain now because Germany reneges on it, right? And in March of 1939, Czechoslovakia is fully occupied by Nazi Germany. Then Hitler looks at Poland, threatens Poland. Meanwhile, Italy conquers Albania. France and Great Britain are allied with Poland. Greece and Romania in order to try to protect them. So doesn't this sound familiar, right? This is almost like that lead up to World War I, right? And Germany and Italy signed the Pact of Steel, like we've talked about when we learned about fascism. Germany and the USSR signed a non-aggression pact with a secret agreement to split Poland again and the rest of Eastern Europe. And then Hitler invades the Danzig corridor through Blitzkrieg, right? And so this kind of gets us to the beginning of the war itself. Blitzkrieg itself is lightning war. And you can pause here and read this. The basic idea is really quick, short military campaigns that won't use a lot of troops. But and limits the amount of artillery when they're successful. Okay. And a lot of times Blitzkrieg fairly was successful. They used it in Poland, they used it in Belgium, they used it in the Netherlands and in France. And eventually even the United States General Patton tried it out in the US as well. But this is kind of the big tactic of World War I. World War II. When we think about what the war looks like, this is a map of Germany. So in dark blue, right, here's Nazi Germany. Then we have, these are areas that Germany has occupied in this like medium blue color. Okay, medium blue, medium blue. Then we have the allies of the Germans, right, or puppet states. Aha, fascists over here, right? We've got the Balkans, right? We've got Finland up here, right? Then we've got nominally occupied places, okay? And right. And so notice, France is already divided, Vichy France, and occupied France, right? So not involved really, Spain, Portugal, Turkey, Sweden, and Switzerland, right? But otherwise it's Germany, right? And all of these European allies against the Soviet Union and the United Kingdom, right? They're really the only two sides here, right? And these are mandate states over here that are still considered part of the United Kingdom. So, wow, right? And Iceland, nobody ever talks about Iceland. So just kind of put this into scope. This is why Hitler is seen as a new Napoleon, okay, in that way. So the Soviet Union then starts to advance. And Poland gets divided very quickly. The Soviets move into the Baltic region, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. They move into Finland, and the Soviets are kicked out of the League of Nations. China then abstains from that League of Nations vote, but the Soviet Union suspends all military aid to China. And in mid-1940s, the Soviet Union sets up pro-Soviet governments in the Baltic states, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, right? So they're expanding as well. Germany also is advancing. They move into Denmark and Norway. Both Denmark and Norway fall to the Nazis. Great Britain and France declare war, but they don't attack. And this is called the Phony War. Okay. Chamberlain is out. Churchill is in because of this disappointment over Norway. And Churchill really emerges as like the great leader in this war. On the same day, Germany invaded France and the Low Countries, making rapid progress using blitzkrieg. And the Maginot Line is a line that was built in the 1930s in France to hold the Germans back, but it did not hold. The Germans invaded. It's like the Schlieffen Plan all over again. And 12 days later, France surrenders and is then divided. Okay, there's a German and Italian occupation zones, and then the unoccupied part of southern France is called Vichy. Vichy France is, really kind of holding up the French flag because the rest of it is Nazis. Germany wages a war in the air and the sea against Great Britain. The Battle of Britain is a big part here. London gets bombed in the Battle of Britain. The Royal Air Force becomes famous. That famous quote, "Never before has so much owed by so many to so few," is about the Royal Air Force's defeat of the Luftwaffe in the Battle of Britain. And by May 1941, Hitler calls off the bombing campaign in Great Britain. All right, we are going to stop here. We will come back and discuss more of the war in the next section.